The nature of the parliamentary system and distribution and increase, Socialism and Production from Crowds and Power by Elias Canetti. Translated from the German by Stewart. The nature of the parliamentary system. The two-party system of modern parliaments uses the psychological structure of opposing armies. In England in the Civil War, these actually existed, although unwillingly. No one likes killing his own countrymen. The feeling of kinship always tends to restrain bloodshed, and sometimes even brings civil wars to an early end. But the two factions remain. They fight on, but in a form of warfare which has renounced killing. In real fighting, it is assumed that the greater number will win. The chief concern of any commander is to be stronger than his adversary at the point of conflict, to have more men there. The successful commander is the one who succeeds in concentrating superior forces at the greatest number of crucial points, even if his total forces are less. A parliamentary vote does nothing but ascertain the relative strengths of two groups at a given time and place. Knowing them beforehand is not enough. One party may have 360 members and the other only 240, but the actual vote is decisive, as the moment in which the one is really measured against the other. It is all that is left of the original lethal clash, and it is played out in many forms, with threats, abuse, and physical provocation, which may lead to blows or missiles. But the counting of the vote ends the battle. It is assumed that 360 men would have defeated 240. The crowd of the dead does not come into the question. In a parliament there are, and can be, no dead. This fact is made clear by the practice of parliamentary immunity. A member's immunity is twofold. It operates both in relation to the government and its agents, and also in relation to other members. This second aspect is usually too little stressed. Now, no one has ever really believed that the majority decision is necessarily the wiser one, because it has received the greater number of votes. It is will against will, as in war. Each is convinced that right and reason are on his side. Conviction comes easily, and the purpose of a party is, precisely, to keep this will and conviction alive. The member of an outvoted party accepts the majority decision not because he has ceased to believe in his own case, but simply because he admits defeat. It is easy for him to do this because nothing happens to him. He is not punished in any way for his previous opposition. He would react quite differently if his life was endangered. What he anticipates, however, is future battles, and many of them. In none of them will he be killed. All members of a parliament share in a like immunity. It is this measure of equality which makes them a crowd, and there is no distinction here between the members of either party. The parliamentary system functions only so long as this immunity is preserved. It crumbles as soon as it admits anyone who allows himself to reckon on the death of any member whatsoever. Nothing is more dangerous here than to see any of the living as dead. War is war because the dead are included in the final reckoning. Parliament is parliament only so long as the dead are excluded. The instinctive way in which the English Parliament, for example, dissociates itself from its dead, even from those who have died peacefully and outside its walls, is shown in the system of by-elections. The dead man's successor is not settled in advance, and no one succeeds automatically to his place. Fresh candidates are put up, and a new election is held in all its formality. The dead man has no place in Parliament. He cannot bequeath his membership, and he can never know for certain who will succeed him after his death. Death, with all its perilous after-effects, has been successfully excluded from the English Parliament. This interpretation of the parliamentary system may be disputed on the grounds that all continental parliaments consist of numerous parties which vary greatly in size, and only sometimes cohere into two opposing groups. But this fact does not affect the significance of the vote. This, everywhere and always, is the crucial moment which determines events, and the crucial factor in it is two figures, the greater of which binds all who have taken part in the vote. All parliaments everywhere stand or fall by the twofold immunity of their members. The popular election of representatives is basically similar to parliamentary procedure. The candidate who has proved himself the strongest, the victor, is reckoned to be the best, and the strongest candidate is the one who obtains the most votes. If the 17,562 who voted for him were to join battle with the 13,204 who voted for his opponent, they would win. But this conflict, too, must stop short of killing. The immunity of the voters is, however, less important than the immunity of the ballot papers on which they vote. Every method of influencing the voters is permitted up to the moment in which they finally make their choice of candidate and write down or indicate his name. The opposing candidate will be held up to every kind of popular contumely and hatred. The elector can take active part in several electoral contests. If he is politically inclined, he will vastly enjoy the ups and downs of the fight, but the moment in which he casts his vote is almost sacred. The sealed boxes which hold the ballot papers are sacred, and so is the count. The solemnity of all these activities derives from the renunciation of death as an instrument of decision. Every single vote puts death, as it were, on one side. But the effect that killing would have had on the strength of the enemy is scrupulously put down in figures, and anyone who tampers with these figures, who destroys or falsifies them, lets death in again without knowing it. Militarists who mock the ballot only betray their own bloodthirsty proclivities. A ballot form, like a treaty, is to them only a scrap of paper. That it has not been dipped in blood renders it contemptible in their eyes. For them, the only valid decisions are those reached through blood. The voting of a member of Parliament is more concentrated than that of an elector. The widely separated moments in which the latter, as such, exists are brought close together in his representative. That is what he is there for, to vote frequently. But the number of those amongst whom he votes is relatively much smaller. Intensity and repetition have to supply the excitement that the electors derive from their numbers. Distribution and increase. Socialism and production. The problem of justice is as old as that of distribution. Whenever men went hunting together, the sequel was distribution. As a pack, they had been united, but when it came to the distribution of the prey, they had to divide, never having developed the communal stomach which would enable them to feed as one creature. In the communion, they found a right which perhaps came nearest to such a conception. It was an approximation, though an inadequate one, to an ideal state for which they felt a need. The isolation which eating entails is one of the roots of that terrifying growth called power. Anyone who eats alone, and in secret, must kill alone. Anyone who kills with others must share the prey with them. Justice begins with the recognition of the necessity of sharing. The oldest law is that which regulates it, and this is still the most important law today, and as such has remained the basic concern of all movements which have at heart the community of human activities and of human existence in general. Justice requires that everyone should have enough to eat, but it also requires that everyone should contribute to the production of food. The overwhelming majority of men are engaged in the production of goods of all kinds. Something has gone wrong with distribution. This, reduced to the simplest terms, is the content of socialism. But, however they are divided about the way in which goods are distributed in the modern world, the adversaries and the partisans of socialism are at one over the precondition of this problem. This is production. Both sides in the ideological conflict which has split the earth into two almost equal halves instigate and further production in every possible way. Whether goods are produced to be sold or to be shared, the actual process of production is not only not questioned by either side, but is venerated. One might almost say that, in the eyes of most people today, there is something sacred about it. It may well be asked where this veneration derives from. Perhaps some point can be found in human history where production became sacrosanct, but a little reflection will show that there is no such point. The phenomenon is so old that any attempt to fix a historical date for it must be meaningless. The hubris of production goes back to the increase pack. The connection may be overlooked because, in practice, it is no longer packs which devote themselves to procuring increase. These have become the enormous crowds which grow daily larger in every center of civilization. But if we remember that no end can be seen to this growth, that there are more and more people producing more and more goods, that these goods include live animals and plants, and that the methods used to produce them can now scarcely be distinguished from those used to produce inanimate goods, then we shall have to admit that the increased pack has been man's most fruitful and successful creation. Increased ceremonies have become machines and techniques. Every factory is a unit serving the same cult. What is new is the acceleration of the process. What in former days was generation and increase of expectancy, directed towards rain or corn, the approach of herds of animals which could be hunted, or the growth of other animals which had been domesticated, has today become production itself. We press a few buttons, connect up various levers, and everything we want, of every possible kind, is there to hand in a few hours or even less. It is worth pointing out that the strict and exclusive combination of proletariat and production, which has acquired such prestige during the last 100 years, reestablishes in a particularly pure form the old conception which was the core of the increased pack. The proletariat are those who increase fastest, and they do so in two ways. First, they have more children than other people, and thus, through their progeny, come to resemble a crowd. And secondly, their numbers are increased by the influx of people from the country to the centers of production. It is exactly the same twofold growth which the readers will remember as characteristic of the primitive increased pack. People flocked to its feasts and ceremonies, and there, many of them gathered together already, they gave themselves up to rites and practices designed to ensure a numerous progeny. When the concept of a dispossessed proletariat was first advanced and began to take effect, it retained the full optimism of increase. No one supposed for a moment that, because their lives were miserable, there ought perhaps to be fewer of them. People relied on production. Through its increase, the proletariat too would increase. Their productivity should serve themselves. Proletariat and production should grow together. This is the very connection which invariably manifests itself in the activities of primitive increase packs. People want to become more numerous themselves, and therefore all the things on which they live must become more numerous too. The one desire cannot be separated from the other. They are so closely linked that it is often not clear what it is that should increase. I have shown that, through transformations into animals which lived together in large numbers, man strengthened his feeling for his own increase. It might indeed be said that he learned it from such animals. He was confronted with shoals of fish, swarms of insects, great herds of hoofed animals, and if he acted these creatures so well in his dances that he became them and felt like them, if he succeeded in fixing these transformations as totems and in passing them on to his descendants as a sacred tradition, he also passed on, together with them, his determination to achieve an increase far exceeding that natural to man. Modern man's relationship to production is exactly the same. Machines today can produce more than anyone would once have dreamed of. Through them, multiplication has grown to monstrous proportions. But since, on the whole, it is objects which are multiplied and not living creatures, man's addiction to sheer numbers increases with the increase of his needs. He can find uses for more and more things, and in using them, he discovers yet further needs. It is production in this sense of unrestricted multiplication in every direction which is the most striking characteristic of capitalist countries. In countries where the proletariat is accorded a special position, and where large accumulations of capital in the hands of individuals are forbidden, the problems of equitable distribution are at least theoretically ranked equal in importance with those of increase.